I've said this before about things like, for instance, how we actually have like three different surveys of the whole entire planet, pretty much. They've back in like 1700 or 1600 or so, we did pipelines down like every couple miles, like every 10 miles apart or something like that, or every 30 miles apart, like across plains like that. We would go down about 30,000 feet or something. No, or like, no, not 30,000 feet, like 20,000 feet, I think, or something. The first one was 10,000 feet. Or five. We had 5,000 foot holes and 40,000 foot holes. And I paid for them to basically, I think maybe it was 10 miles apart. I think it's 10 miles apart because otherwise it'd be a lot of holes. So what they did was they started down at the Cape and they started drilling like 10 miles apart. They'd go 10 miles in over and then drill a deep case on. And then they would come up and then they would go 10 miles up and then they would drill another deep case on. And then they would come up and then maybe, I think it was 50 miles by 10 miles across. You know, they did a grid pattern over the continents that was like 50 miles or 100 miles by 10 miles across. But you can miss a lot that way. And they went down only about 5,000 feet the first time. And they just went all over this continent. And then they went over all of Europe first. And then they went over all of this continent. And then the second pass that we did, we picked the middle spots and we went down 10,000 feet or 12,000 feet down into the ground, drilling holes. And we got a few more that way. And we surveyed the whole of this continent, and I paid for that too. But all of what is America and this side, and then I paid for all of Europe basically. All the way even down into Africa, I think. They would. Well, mostly I think I avoided Africa maybe because it's too dangerous down there. There's certain places where it's too dangerous, but basically they would drill down about 12,000 feet and then back up and then move on. And they surveyed the whole thing. And then on some places where it was a mountain or something like that, I think they went down 30,000 feet or something, or 50,000 feet straight down, doing test holes, a couple. Which is basically they would measure and see what kind of rock it was and then pull it back out, doing case samples. Thousands of them. It took like 50 years for somebody. A team actually went and they spent their whole lifetime, 50 years, doing doing drilling over all of South America, all of America, and all of basically Brazil, all the way down to Colombia, and even over there in Europe. So every inch of these continents has been surveyed, basically. There isn't nothing that we don't know. And it's all stored in the mining report. So we know where all the minerals are. We know where all the coal is. We know where everything is down to about 50,000 feet or so into the ground. Certain spots, anyway. So, and some go to even deeper, down a couple 100 miles or something like that. Like the one in Russia, which was basically, let's see how deep of a hole we could drill. And they actually went down about 30,000 feet, and then they put a drill platform. They went down 30,000 feet and then dug out, making a big hole. I think it was too hot to go down there or be down there for very long. And I think they might have filled it with water, I don't know. But anyway, it was really hot down there. So then they drilled out an area, and there's like this big room that they made down there with air conditioning and stuff or something. There's this big room. And then they basically put the drill rig right there. And then they drilled down another 30,000 feet. And they did this a couple times maybe. I don't really know. But basically it was a pretty massive project that they actually did. And it took them like 3 or 5 or 12 years or something like that. It was huge, and it was a big, long, forever project. It was going all the way through 1920s, all the way through, what's it called? It was actually pretty cool. Actually, we were going down. I think they might have gone down 100,000 feet. I don't know. But they went down a long, long ways. They went down so far that they had to stop and, like I say, make a room and even set up special cooling where they used Freon to actually cool the rock or cool the room because it was just so hot. And they finally went down until the titanium bit could no longer drill. I don't know how hot it was, but it was pretty... That's about like 5,000 degrees. Yeah, the rock was about 5,000 degrees. They went down until basically the drill bit would, the rock was literally the same temperature as the drill bit, pretty much. And then they stopped. So, And then they stuck down a radiation probe all the way down there, and measured the radiation that is down there at the deepest, hottest point. And they had to make a special thermometer because the rock was already at 5,000 degrees. Because that's what temperature, and I think it was actually like a 10,000 pound, 10,000 whatever. The material that they use, I think, could go up to 12,000 degrees or something like that, without actually, being damaged or something or melting. But so, I don't really know exactly. I just know they went down a long, long ways. Anyway, I paid for it, of course, or at least I didn't really. Well, I paid for some of it, and then some of it was just like a whole bunch of people were just like, let's see how far we can drill. Yeah. Yeah, and they just went down there and they did their thing, and they got really creative and everything else like that. And they found out what kind of material is really down there, really deep. So, like I said, they got to where basically the rock was 5,000 or 10,000 degrees, and then that was it. They said, okay, that's good enough. And that's like, I think 100,000 feet underneath the ground or something like that, or some great distance, or 200,000 feet underneath the ground. They told me, and I was like, oh, cool. Or something like that. It's some great distance, but I was like, oh, that's great. That's great, I'm pretty much, it's kind of cool. I'm glad they did it. But anyway, and they finished that off around 1950 or 1960 or 1970 or something. Anyway, or 1980, I don't know, some year. Anyway, like I say, we did SR-71. Like I say, Lockheed had nothing to do with the SR-71. Nothing at all. That was built in Germany and actually Russia. Lockheed never touched it. They never worked on it. They never built it. They never designed for it. They had nothing to do with my SR-71. That was Germany and Russia. It was 70 years old by the time Lockheed ever saw it. It was 70 years old by the time all that video of them sitting on it and talking to whatever. That was just them pointing at a guy wearing a suit. My engineers wouldn't let them fly it, because it's too fragile and too valuable. And, and they tried to build an aluminum one and everything else like that. So, and I've made other videos about what they did and stuff like that. And, it was basically just some guys wearing a thing at the factory. My guys would take a break, and then they would go and make sure that everything that they were lifting wasn't too hard for them to lift. And then later on, they tried to lock up and kill my people, that actually owned the factory and actually worked at the factory. So that's what Nixon and JFK did, is they tried to kill all my people, and they might have killed quite a few, or locked them up, or arrest them, or put them in prison forever. Basically, after they did the videos and stuff like that of them checking to make sure that their backs weren't hurt by lifting up heavy pieces. So they lifted up the bombs and stuff like that, and then they went and posted all this video of how Lockheed's doing all this stuff. And Lockheed was nothing other than, the Skunk Works and Lockheed was nothing other than an office that was 8 by 12, where basically there was a printer and they printed checks for them to go look at things. That's all Lockheed ever was. That's all the Skunk Works ever was. But they laundered and, used up like $1 billion, $1 million, $100 million. It was the hugest scam ever. They were trying to take over the world and take over the government. So anyway, that's JFK, Nixon's lie, pretty much. And then, their stock is worthless. They are not really a company. Basically Boeing is pretty much the only real manufacturer of anything, and they own, and I own everything. So anyway, Lockheed doesn't exist other than a piece of paper. Anyway, no one ever worked for them back in the 50s or 60s. They built a plywood SR-71. That's it. That's all JFK and Nixon and all of them were. It's all a big scam for them. And then they tried to kill Europe or Germany and a bunch of other people, scientists and stuff. So anyway, people get to deal with their own whatever, but pretty much that's the way it was. Anyway.